Bible lesson this morning, sometimes I make this statement, and it doesn't work out that way, and sometimes it does. But I have a lot of things to say and a lot of material, so I'm going to try to go pretty quickly. I want to ask a question. Why are so many people miserable? We have a world filled with people who obviously have a lot of problems. I see constantly about the push for mental health issues in our country. And I see many other things that indicate that people are really just not very happy sometimes. And you kind of wonder why. Why do you think that's true? Well, I think really if you look around you, many people are just not. They're miserable, they're unhappy. Maybe most, I don't know, if I were to take a survey. But I would say that probably most people are not just 100% happy. They just don't really feel like things are like they would like them to be. Could it be, you think, that sometimes our problem is, as a saying that's been used many times, that we major in minors? We get very concerned about things that probably are not that important in the overall scheme of things. In the book of Matthew chapter 6, in verse 32 and 33, you're all familiar with it, Jesus made a statement. He was talking about being concerned about what you eat and what you drink and what you be clothed with and all these things that you have. And he said, "For after all these things do the Gentiles seek. For your heavenly Father knoweth that you have need of these things." And he kind of tells you the key. "But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." You think that people are chasing something that really doesn't provide the answer? It amazes me when I've looked at the lottery that's become so popular in the last several years. Even the TV shows made about it where people go buy houses and all that kind of thing. But if you went and had a talk with them, I suspect that most of them would find that their level of happiness has changed very little. From having the nothing to having the $900 million or whatever it is that they advertise on the TV and the radio. You know, when I think about that, I look and I see that I was listening yesterday. We were down here and I was driving back home after the workday and heard a country song that I never heard before. It said, "They say money can't buy everything, but it'll buy me a boat." That's kind of the way I think most people think. And the problem is that it becomes just one of a long line of things that we go through trying to find happiness, and in the end we find that really wasn't the answer. And when you then think about this, in reality, I think happiness probably, and peace, which is tied to happiness, peace of mind, comes from knowing that we're doing something meaningful, that we're doing something that has some meaning. When I look into the world and I see a lot of really unhappy people, man, I don't know that I've ever seen more unhappy people than some of the people in the entertainment industry. They look like they've just sucking on a pickle all the time. They just look awful. They always talk and I'm thinking, these are millionaires. What's the deal? But then you think, what does their life accomplish? Probably not much, unless they become involved in some charity. Now, some of them accomplish great things. I mean, in our area, you hear a lot about St. Jude's because it's in Memphis. Danny Thomas was an entertainer, but his mission was that. Entertainment was a way to support it. So he had some kind of happiness because I'm doing something that means something. But you kind of see the answer to that in Romans 8, where he said, "They that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh, but they that are after the Spirit, the things of the Spirit." And then he said, to be carnally minded is death, because it doesn't lead anywhere. But to be spiritually minded is life, and then that secret word that's really tied to happiness, peace. In the book of Ecclesiastes, and then we're going to look at the book of Ecclesiastes a great deal in the end part of our lesson this morning. But when you look in the book of Ecclesiastes, the writer seems to indicate that, hey, you know, we kind of are tied to the idea of we got enough common sense to realize what really is meaningful and what's not. And so here's what he says in this particular passage. Moreover, the profit of the earth is for all. The king himself is served with the field. He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver. He that loveth abundance with increase. And then you have this secret word here. This is also vanity. Which goods, when goods increase, they're increased that eat them. And what good is there to the owners thereof, saving the beholding of them with their eyes? The sleep of a slumbering man is sweet, whether eaten little or much. But the abundance of the rich shall not suffer him to sleep. And he really seems to be indicating that we kind of major in minors. The things that we think are so important, really in the long run, are not. I've said to many people, you look at the problems you're experiencing today, and especially younger people, and you think these are horrible, I don't know how I'm going to get through them. If you would make a note on your calendar for today's date and note that particular problem that's really causing you a lot of distress, and next year look at the same date at the same calendar and see what that means to you then. Probably not much. We need to understand that, you know, our life needs to be spent doing some things that are meaningful. In our world, we have some serious problems. And I don't have to tell you, I mean, everybody knows it to be true. We have a serious drug problem. The number of people who die from overdoses every year is enormous. And people who are taking drugs know the risk that's involved, and they know that, hey, you know, this may happen, particularly in this age of fentanyl. But hey, the benefit far outweighs the risk, they think. It's going to give me some peace of mind. I'm going to be able to be somewhat happy for a period of time, so I'm willing to risk it. And how many people are involved in that? In Isaiah, it's interesting that they didn't, of course, have many of the modern drugs that we have, but they had alcohol, which is the first drug that's ever invented. Come ye, say they, I will fetch wine, and we will fill ourselves with strong drink. Sound like a lot of people you know. And tomorrow shall be as this day, and much more abundant. It won't cause a problem, and it's really going to advance things, and I'm going to feel better. You ever know a drunk? Does he feel better the next day? You never know a drug addict? Does that really add to his happiness so that he's just the happiest thing? Look at the pictures of the real hardcores that we have in this country, the homeless society, in which there is a tremendous drug issue. One of the biggest problems you have around that is the needles laying everywhere that people are sticking themselves with. Doesn't look like a very happy bunch, does it? Just does not. And so Isaiah was right. And he said, you know, we make this mistake. We decide that, hey, we can use alcohol, we can use other forms of drugs, and somehow that's really going to solve our problems. That's going to make us feel better. Well, the problem with that is it's very deceiving. The wise man Solomon in the Proverbs 20 and verse 1 said, wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereby is not wise. It will not provide the answer that you believe that it will. He went on to say in the 23rd chapter, in verse 31 and 32, look not upon the wine when it is red, when it giveth its color in the cup, when it moveth itself aright. At the last it biteth like a serpent, and stingeth like an adder. It's not going to provide what you think it is, but it is our problem in this world. One of the biggest problems we have in this world today is in this search for happiness. Evidently people think, oh, happiness comes out of a bottle or comes out of a needle or comes out of a pill, but it does not. You know, when you look at the enormous increase in suicide that we have in our country, and it has been enormous, in some people, in some age groups, it's just been hundreds of percent higher than it ever has been at any point in recorded history. And you're kind of wondering, what is the problem? What's going on? Well, when you go back and you look at what Jeremiah had to say in the 18th chapter, verse 11. Now therefore go to, speak ye to the men of Judah, and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, saying, thus saith the Lord, behold, I frame evil against you, and devise a device against you. Return you now, every one from his evil way, and make your ways and your doings good. And they said, here's what they said, there is no hope. That's what they said. When you look at a suicide, don't you realize that whatever the suicide note says, that in reality, the real problem is there is no hope. I'm trying to be happy. I'm trying to find peace, and I don't. I don't. And so what's the problem? Well, the problem is, in most cases, we just seek it in the wrong place. These people went on to say, but we will walk after our own devices. We're going to do what we please. And we will every one do the imagination of his evil heart. That's what they said. No wonder the world is in such a mess. You know, we're concerned about all the wrong things. We have all this concern, but the concern is about all the wrong things. We don't ever stop and think about things that we really need to think about. And that's a lot of the problems that we have in this world. In reading Philippians chapter 4, and it's a famous passage, you've read it many times, he said, rejoice in the Lord always. And again I say rejoice. That has to do with happiness, doesn't it? Let your moderation be known to all men. Self-control is really the word. The Lord is at hand. You don't get much happiness from turning yourself loose. You get happiness from controlling yourself. Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God, and the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. And you know what he said? The key is here. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. These things which you have both learned and received and heard and seen in me do, and the God of peace shall be with you. Our problem is we major in minors. We're not paying attention to what's important. What's important is our spiritual life. Our physical life is going to last for a few years. I'm 76, soon to be 77. So mine's the sunset years, as they call them. So you know they don't have a whole lot left to go. You may be 20 and think, boy, everything's great, and I've got all kind of time. I was 20 once and thought I had all kind of time, but that time has run out. And you stop and you think and you realize that in reality, physical things have to do with this physical life, and when they bury us, or they cremate us, as has become very popular in today's world, whichever, the box that your ashes are put in is about that big, and the box that your body is put in is about a 3x6, 3x7. So you stop and you think, and you realize how much we major in minors. Solomon wrote 3 books. I love them all because they're so commonsensical. In Proverbs chapter 1, when he wrote the book of Proverbs, he really told you kind of the secret to what he was writing about. He wants to tell you something. And what he wants to tell you is, if you want to be happy in your life, here's how you accomplish it. He wrote the Proverbs of Solomon to know the wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity, to give subtlety to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsels, to understand a proverb, to the interpretation, the words of the wise, and the dark sayings. The fear of the Lord, he said, is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. My son, hear the instruction of thy father, forsake not the law of thy mother, for they shall be an ornament of grace unto thy head, and chains about thy neck. He's talking about just the wisdom to do what's right, and to know what's important, and to know what's not, and to spend your life in pursuits that bring real happiness, and not pursuing things that offer nothing but emptiness. And you know, sometimes people read the Song of Solomon, and I don't know, I've heard all kinds of interpretations of it, but I've read it a good many times and taught it once here. And I'm really convinced that what he really is doing is saying that in the beginning God created man, he made a woman, then he said it's not good that man be alone, and so then marriage became a reality, which is the standard of our society. Now look at what he said about it. In Song of Solomon chapter 3 and verse 1 through verse 5. By night on my bed I sought him, talking from the woman's perspective, whom my soul loveth. I sought him, but I found him not. I will rise now, go about the city of the streets, and in the broad ways I will seek him whom my soul loveth. I sought him, and I found him not. The watchmen that go about the city found me, to whom I said, Saw ye him whom my soul loveth? It was but a little that I passed from them, but I found him whom my soul loveth. Notice that expression. I held him and would not let him go until I had brought him to my mother's house, in the chamber of her that conceived me. I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the roes, by the hinds of the field, that ye stir not up, nor awake my love till he please. But then if you turn to the 4th chapter in verse 8, he looks from the other side, and he talks from the man's perspective. Come with me from Lebanon, my spouse, with me from Lebanon. Look from the top of Amana, from the top of Shinar and Hermon. In other words, whatever I'm involved in, you're part of it. From the lion's dens, from the mountains of the leopards, thou hast ravished my heart, my sister, my spouse. Thou hast ravished my heart with one of thine eyes, with one chain of thy neck. How far is thy love, my sister, my spouse? How much better is thy love than wine, and the smell of thine ointments than all spices? Thy lips, O my spouse, drop as the honeycomb. Honey and milk are under thy tongue, and the smell of thy garments is like the smell of Lebanon. It's interesting reading. But what he's really telling you is God knows the secret to happiness. You listen to all the songs, and I don't listen to much but country, but the country songs are out chasing skirts and leaving their wife at home, and they think that's going to find happiness. You reckon? You look at the situation, you think that's going to find it? You think the woman who's out chasing men, that she's going to find happiness in that? Is that something you really think is true? Just think about what he said and what's really good for you and what brings some real peace of mind and happiness in your life. Have an established family that you feel like you're accomplishing something, you're bringing up the next generation and preparing them and equipping them for it. There's a lot to be said for that, and we need to think about it. And then the book of Ecclesiastes. You know, in the book of Ecclesiastes, he speaks of vanity. And he speaks of trying to find happiness and fulfillment in some way that ignores God's plan. And he was in a position, Solomon was. He was in a position to pursue it. Because I want to tell you something. What everybody thinks of is kind of like that song. That song went a whole lot further than just buy a boat. He talked about other things he could buy too. Wine, women, and song, basically. But people have this idea that money is something that will solve my problems. And if I win the lottery, my problems are solved. Let me tell you something. If you win $9 million today and you wake up in the morning, you're still the same person, you still live in the same body, you still have the same brain. So what's different? You say, oh boy, it's just a whole lot. No. What's really different that affects anything? Your health will still be the same. It's not going to change anything. Maybe the size of the house you live in, the kind of car you drive. But what does that really matter when it comes down to it? That's really what we need to understand. I want to read a couple of passages in the Psalms and in Proverbs because I think they're both interesting passages because they use the word vanity. There's so many. I tried to count them, and they become overwhelming. The book of Psalms uses the word vanity over 100 times. In Psalms 94, in verse 11, he said, the Lord knoweth the thoughts of man. That's what he does. He knows what's in your brain. And you know what he said? That they are vanity. Man thinks things that are just not true. When man begins to think of what's going to make him happy in his life, make him have some feeling of fulfillment and contentment, he thinks things that are just not true. Vanity means empty and useless. It means it serves no purpose. This means that it may be pretty to look at, and that's about it. Vanity doesn't have any real purpose. In the 20th chapter, we looked at the 20th chapter in verse 1, talked about wine and how deceitful it is, but if you get down to verse 4, he said, verse 24 rather, he said in this passage, man's goings are of the Lord. How can a man then understand his own way? How many times have you been somewhere, had your GPS, had it set, and you looked at it and said, I just don't think that's right. I believe I'll go this way. And that didn't work out well. You know, God's giving you a GPS. He's telling you how to do it. He's telling you how to go. It may not look exactly like you might have thought it would look to travel in that way. But you know something? There's one thing that often is said about a dog. If you're going to train a dog, what do you got to have? You got to know more than he does. You don't know more than he does, you can't train him anything. We look to people who know no more than we do, and maybe less, and we look to them for answers when there is one that has all the answers and we pay him no attention. Just give it some thought. Now, let's go to the book of Ecclesiastes. You know, Solomon tried to get meaning out of in several different ways. And what he concluded is, he concluded that all these ways that I'm trying are vain. They're just not carrying me. They're not really taking me where I want to be. And so I'm trying to figure out what is the secret here, and how can I possibly be happy? You know what he tried? Well, he begins in chapter 1. He said, well, I first tried education, tried to learn everything I could. I've seen all the words that are done under the sun. Behold, he said, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. And he said, here's the problem. That which is crooked cannot be made straight. That which is wanting cannot be numbered. I commune with mine own heart, saying, lo, I am come to great estate, and have gotten more wisdom than all they that have gone before me in Jerusalem. Yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. I could have 10 PhDs. And I gave my heart to know wisdom, to know madness and folly, and I perceived that this also is vexation of spirit. Here he left off vanity. He said, you know, it vexes me to realize how much time I've invested, and I'm no better off than I was when I started. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. You know, you stop and you think, in our country, education is really hyped. And it's almost like we look and we say, the people that mean something are over here and they're educated, and the people that mean nothing are over here and they're not. But the truth is, there are people over there that mean something, there are people over here who mean something. The ones who have pursued spiritual things and are accomplishing worthwhile purposes. Other people, whether they're educated or whether they're uneducated, it really doesn't matter. What matters is, what are they doing with their life? And what are they really accomplishing with it? And what are they preparing for? Think about this. In the next one, and this is a long reading, but I want to read it because it's important. In our country, we have a word that's become popular. And when I was a kid, it was not a word. The word is partying. When I was a kid and a young man, partying had never been thought of. Nowadays, it's really the popular expression. We're partying. What that means, we're getting drunk and we're chasing women and chasing men, or whatever the case may be. That's kind of what we're doing. That's what partying is. We're just living a reckless, immoral lifestyle. He said, I tried that. I said in mine heart, go to now, I will prove thee with mirth. Therefore enjoy pleasure. And behold, this also is vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of mirth, what doeth it? I sought in mine heart to give myself into wine, yet acquainting mine heart with wisdom, and to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was then good for the sons of men, when they should do under the sun all the days of their lives. I made me great works. I builded houses. I planted vineyards. I made gardens and orchards. I planted all kinds of trees. I made pools of water that brought forth trees. I got me servants and maidens, had servants born in my house, became extremely wealthy, could do whatever I pleased. I gathered all the silver and gold, and I got me men singers. I had all the entertainment I ever wanted. I'd go to a movie every minute if I wished. I got me men singers and women singers and the delights of the sons of men as musical instruments and that of all sorts. So I was great and increased with all that were before me in Jerusalem, and my wisdom remained with me. And whatsoever mine heart I desired, I kept not from them. I withhold not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. Then he said, I looked, on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. And I turned myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do that cometh after the king, even that which hath been already done? Then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly as far as light excelleth darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walketh in darkness. And I myself perceived also that one event happened to them all. Then said I in my heart, as it happened to the fool, so it happened to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in mine heart, that this is also vanity. For there is no remembrance of the wise more than the fool forever. Seeing that which now is in the days to come shall all be forgotten. And how dieth the wise man of the fool? Therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. It kind of ties to that suicide issue, doesn't it? How many people have you seen that have killed themselves? They've been so wealthy, celebrities, involved in all manner of living. How many? I can think of a whole list of them. So he tells you, be careful. The good life, as we describe it, the partying and all those things that go with it, and living in the high society, and oh, it's just so great, except it means nothing. And then he tried something else. He said, I want to be in control of everything. You a control freak? Yea, I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. That's a serious problem. You know, you get as wealthy as you want. You can amass all the wealth you want to amass. But when you die, whoever comes after you may not share your aspirations. I can remember in this area someone who had a really a little unusual lifestyle, to say the least. And he was a wealthy guy. Had a lot of property. Didn't have a family, but he had a lot of property. He finally left it to someone else. Do you know on that place that's standing now, there's not a single building that he built? Not one. There's not a single piece of equipment that he valued and that he put all of his interest in. Not one. It's been completely changed. So we have this idea that we're going to control everything. We don't control much of anything. The truth is. And he said, and who knoweth whether shall be a wise man or a fool? Yet shall he have rule over all my labor wherein I have labored, and wherein I have shown myself wise under the sun. This is also, he said, vanity. And he goes on, and he said, therefore I went about to cause my heart to despair of all the labor which I took under the sun. For there's a man whose labor is in wisdom and in knowledge and in equity, yet to a man that hath not labored therein shall he leave it for his portion. This also is vanity and a great evil. For what man of all his labor, or what man hath of all of his labor, and of the vexation of his heart, wherein he hath labored under the sun? For all his days are sorrow. Notice what he said. All his days are sorrow, and his travail grief. Yea, his heart taketh not rest in the night. This is also vanity. He then gives an observation. There's nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. For who can eat it, or who else can hasten hereunto more than I? For God giveth it to a man that is good in his sight, wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he giveth travail to gather and to heap up, that he may give to him that is good before him. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit. You know what he's really telling you? You know, you kind of need to learn that we're not in control of much of anything, including our life. I mean, the fact is, the Lord sustains our life. Had a professional golfer that died. I'd be going to be interested to see why. 30 years old, very successful. Happened yesterday. He kind of illustrates the point. Reckon he thought about that was going to happen to him? Probably not, but it did. He was not in control, and neither were we. And you study Luke 12 over and over, and you find that truth to be so. And he saw something. What he saw was that you do all that, and people look at you. Have you ever thought about the amount of people in this country who hate rich people? They hate celebrities. They hate them. They can't stand them. Why? Well, it's jealousy and envy. So he looked and he said, I considered all travail and every right work, and that for this a man is envied of his neighbor. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. So that person, when you're looking at someone else and you're envying them, and you think, oh, well, they've got it so good and I don't have it, and it's just awful. I deserve to have what they have, and this and that and the other that you hear from people all the time. As if, in reality, that would make a difference in their life. But the truth is it would not. He said, the fool foldeth his hands together and eateth his own flesh. Better is an handful with quietness than both the handful with travail and vexation of spirit. And what he's telling you is that you need to get a grip on what makes you happy. Brother Martin Dean had a father-in-law who was a blacksmith and a pretty poor fellow that lived over in western part of Murray County. And Brother Martin would talk about him, and he said his father-in-law always said, I'm happy, and I'm happy because I've learned to want what I have. You think about what a profound statement that is. In other words, he had figured out that, I can be resentful of other people. It may not be what it appears up there on top of the hill. It may not be at all. I went to a house of someone one day that these people were extremely wealthy, in my opinion, at least compared to me. On a Saturday morning, got to the door and heard all kind of screaming inside and carrying on. So Brian was actually with me, and we left and said, we'll come back later. Came back, and the problem was the lady's daughter had spent a night with the boy out in the motel room all night the night before her graduation. She was all tore up, and they was fighting and fussing. But when we walked back in the room, they were just being so polite to each other, talking so courteous. See, you have the impression that's given you that, everything is great, and these people have a great life. Might not. He said, you know what? Be satisfied with the one the Lord gave you. And you don't become resentful of the success of others. And then sometimes people think they have all the answers. There are people who think, I can solve all the problems, and I've got all the answers. In this passage, he said, better is a poor and a wise child than an old and foolish king who will no more be admonished. Now you think about what he said. He's not going to be admonished. He's not going to listen. He knoweth not to be admonished is what he says in verse 13. In other words, he doesn't have enough sense to know that sometimes we don't have all the answers, and someone may offer us an alternative that might be the thing that will be good. You just think about that. You ever meet someone who have all the answers, and they don't listen to anybody, and they're not going to take any advice, no instruction? He said, out of prison he cometh to reign, whereas also he that is born in his kingdom becometh poor. I consider all the living which walk under the sun, and the second child that shall stand in his stead. There is no end of all the people, even of all them that have been before them. They also that cometh after him shall not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and vexation of spirit. We think we got all the answers, and we're the one that everything revolves around. But we're going to live about 70 years. What about all the people who lived before us, and what about all the people who live after us? It kind of shows us how insignificant we actually are and how little we actually know. If we knew so much, maybe we could figure out how to stick around a while, which man has been trying for many, many centuries. And some just simply want what they can't have. And that's a serious problem. In the 6th chapter, verse 9, he said, better is in the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. If you sit down to eat and you got a hot dog, it'll fill your belly and you'll be able to go the next day. Sitting there and wondering about, wish you had a T-bone steak, is not really going to accomplish anything. That's really what he's telling you. He's saying, the sight of the eyes is better than the wandering of the spirit. This is vanity and vexation of spirit. You can't sit there and become involved in things thinking that this is going to solve it, but you don't have them. That which hath been is named already, and it is known that it is man, neither may he contend with him that is mightier than he. So that's kind of realize, the way it is. And you wishing for what you don't have won't make you happy. It'll make you miserable. And a lot of folks fall into that category in our present age. And some never learn to trust God. That's a real serious problem. In the 6th chapter, verse 11, he said, seeing there may be many things that increase, vanity. What is man the better? Just think about it. For who knoweth what is good for the man in his life? All the days of his life vain, which he spendeth as a shadow. For who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? I think some back to that old country music song that says, I thank God for unanswered prayers. You ever thought of the things you prayed for, and when you didn't get them, later you sat back and said, Lord, I sure thank you that you didn't grant that request. You have to realize and you have to understand that we have to trust God a little bit. In fact, we have to trust Him implicitly. And if we don't, we're going to end up in a mess. In the 8th chapter of the book of Romans, there are 2 verses that are important. Well, there are many of them, but 2 of them that really put it together. He said, likewise, the Spirit also helpeth our infirmities. For we know not what we should pray as we ought. But the Spirit itself maketh intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. Well, why is that true? Because God searcheth the hearts. Now, he that searcheth the hearts knoweth what is the mind of the Spirit, because he maketh intercession for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to His purpose. And I've heard people many times, and I state that and say, I just don't see how this that happened to me is in my best interest. We're going to talk tonight a little bit about something. We're going to talk about doubt. And we're going to begin with talking about Job. And the real serious problem that Job had was doubt when you get down to it. And you begin to study it and you'll see that it's so. He began to talk about what would have been good, and he didn't really understand it all, and neither do I. And there are a lot of things that happened to me in this life, and they didn't look very good to me. But God's not looking at an individual thing. God's looking at what is in your best interest. You've sinned and you've fallen short of the glory of God, so you ought to be destroyed eternally. That's the truth. But you cannot be, by the grace of God, by being forgiven by Him. But can you erase the world you live in that is controlled by Satan? No. Can you control your life when you allow it to be controlled by Satan? No. You can repent, you can be forgiven, but you can't. Whatever you did then, it's still there. And so you stop and you think. You're trying to blame God for things. I tell you what we need to do. We need to learn to trust God and say, the important thing is when I stand before you in judgment, what's going to be the answer? The rest of the things will become rather meaningless at that point. And that's something that I think everyone needs to understand, and they need to realize, and they need to grasp quickly. How do I know that? In this book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon went through this thing, and he said, I have done. It's like he's really saying, if you name it, I've done it. So if anything on this earth could provide any degree of peace of mind and sense of fulfillment, then thus, as we would describe it, happiness, if anything could do that, anything, I've done it. And what I can tell you is I've reached a conclusion. He even tells you. It's interesting. A lot of times you look at an outline and it says introduction and conclusion. Most books of the Bible don't do that. They kind of begin and they end. Solomon does begin with an introduction and a conclusion. The introduction in the first chapter is there's no new thing under the sun. Whatever you've tried, everybody else has. The conclusion is this. He said we need to fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter, he said. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. You know, it's kind of interesting to me, and I want to read something and then we'll stop. Been a little longer than I intended to be, but I'm trying. In Matthew chapter 5, a lot of people don't realize it, but Matthew chapter 5 is the secret to happiness. That's what it is. The first 12 verses. It is the secret to happiness, especially verses 2 through 12. You read the King James translation, it said blessed. You read any other translation you want to read, it will say happy. So let's read happy. Happy are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Happy are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Happy are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Happy are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Happy are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Happy are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Happy are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Happy are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of God, or heaven. Blessed are ye, happy are ye, when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. I'm going to tell you something sometimes. You read the book of Hebrews, especially the 11th chapter, the last part of that chapter that talks about all these people were persecuted, put to death, etc. If you could look at them at the present time, in their current circumstances, in paradise or in Hades, which one's happy and which one's not? It's a great lesson, I think. This world is searching for happiness. There's an old country song that said, searching for love in all the wrong places. We have the same problem. We're searching for happiness in all the wrong places. You know, have you ever thought about, when you look at the Ethiopian eunuch and his conversion, what it said? He said, what doth hinder me to be baptized? He said, if thou believest thou mayest. They went down in the water and he baptized him. And you know what the next words are? He went on his way doing what? Rejoicing. Think about it and consider it together. We stand as we sing.